Hello, everyone. Thank you for those who are joining us live on Zoom and for those who are watching later. Welcome to our 8Talks. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into volumetric video and WebAR holograms. We are so excited to talk about the development of the Burger King and Tinie Whoppa on a Whopper WebAR experience. Tom Emrich, VP of Product at 8Talks, is joined by Richard Atkins, Head of Digital Production at BBH London, Carlson Bull, CEO and Executive Creative Director at Bully Entertainment, and Simon Windsor, co-founder and joint managing director at Dimension Studios.
Thank you, Dinah, for the introduction. And what a way to start an 8Talks, everyone, with such an energetic song from Tinie. And I hope you all ate today, because over the next hour, we are going to be talking a lot about burgers. Hi, my name is Tom Emrich, and I'm the VP of Product at 8Talks, the leading WebAR development platform. And I'll also be your moderator for today's conversation. We're going to leave some time for audience Q&A, so be sure to hit that Zoom Q&A function, register your question. I'll get to your questions at the end of the session. So we just watched an awesome reel showcasing behind the scene clips, as well as the Whoppa on a Whopper 8Talks WebAR experience for Burger King, which featured a volumetric video performance of UK rap star Tinie, created by BBH London, Bully Entertainment, and Dimension. And now it is time to have a conversation with the team that made the world's tiniest concert happen. So hello, Richard, Carlson, and Simon. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello. Hi.
So listen, to kick things off, I'm going to give you all a chance to help the audience understand a little bit more about you and your company and how you all work together on this project. So let's do a round of introductions, and we're going to start with Richard from BBH London.
So hi, my name's Richard. I'm head of digital production at BBH London. As Tom says, we're a full service creative agency working for the likes of Burger King, obviously, but also Audi, Tesco, a variety of clients out there. And we work across TV, film, print, and digital.
Great. Carlson.
Hi, Carlson Bull. I'm CEO and creative director of Bully Entertainment. We are a creative content agency focused on high-end emerging tech experiences. Always lots of storytelling involved in all of our executions, and we were kind of the anchor man on this project, the developer, once all the creative got sorted out above. So
nice. And Simon.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone. I'm Simon Windsor, co-founder and joint managing director at Dimension Studios. By way of a quick intro to Dimension, we are an XR entertainment company. Our studios focus in the creation of virtual realities and virtual humans, primarily bringing together volumetric capture technologies and real-time production capabilities, which are used across filmmaking and XR content creation, from sport and music and fashion to film itself, and then a lot of branded entertainment productions. We've got several volumetric capture stages which we deploy worldwide.
That's amazing. And just for the audience that may be new to the technology, Simon, what does XR stand for? Extended reality.
So I think it's the general catch-all for augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality.
Okay, and before we get into the Burger King experience in particular and all the details, some of the storytelling behind how this all happened, let's start by just talking about WebAR, web-based augmented reality. Simon, what is WebAR, and why are brands so interested in using it as part of their marketing and advertising mix today?
Well, WebAR is revolutionary, really, because if you go back not too long now, a couple of years ago, most AR experience would have been deployed via a native mobile application, which would have involved audiences or customers downloading an app in order to access an experience. With WebAR, we can share our experiences over the internet, accessible via your web browser on a mobile phone. So there's no need for people to download a specific application to access those experiences and content. And I think what's really exciting about it is it provides universal access to AR experiences on mobile, whether you're accessing content via a trigger or an image or a QR code or none of those. Brands can now layer rich interactive 3D content onto experiences or indeed onto burgers, you know, via AR on their mobile.
I love that. WebAR enables burger AR. That's the big takeaway. Speaking of burgers, Richard, take us back way back to the beginning of how this all came together. Tell us a little bit about the brief from Burger King for this campaign.
Absolutely. So we all know what happened last year. We're all going into lockdown globally, and in the summer, the UK certainly was starting to think about opening up a bit. The cases of infection were dying down, and it had been really tough for Burger King because the stores were all closed. There was no source of revenue coming in. And so they wanted to think about how can we do something that is going to ultimately drive people in store, but also something that's entertaining when there's so much negativity in the news out there. And it wasn't a specific AR brief or anything like that. It was, how can we engage people? How can we do something that will ultimately, get people in stores primarily, and then engaging with the brand, so the brand is front of mind, basically. The whole thing with Tinie came about almost as a fluke. This, it was a case of he came out with his track and there was some engagement, and we were going back and forth and going, actually, there is an opportunity to do this. But that then brought with it quite a significant sort of time frame that we had to work within, which we'll talk about later. But we did a number of things with Tinie, of which this experience was a key part.
Okay, and you mentioned that this wasn't a specific AR brief. Like Burger King didn't come to you and say, use AR, use WebAR,
no,
use
not at all.
Volumetric video.
This was something that we put forward. One of our creative teams were coming up with a number of different ideas, and it was just, I think the creative team had seen some sort of holographic experience before, and were like, well, hang on, why don't we go and do this? And they thought they were playing with the whole Whopper on a Whopper, or wrapper on a Whopper or something, and things like that. And it was just like, it's a tongue twister itself. And it was just one of those ideas. And so that then became, I'd never worked on anything like this. And I called up a friend over at Dimension, and the brief literally went, don't worry, this is never going to happen, but how would we approach this? And then the next call was, this is never going to happen, but I do need to start thinking about numbers and what might be the costs and how we might do this. And these calls are like literally like days apart because of the time frame work to, okay, this might actually be happening. How on earth are we going to do this? And that was basically BBH working with Dimension to actually build up the idea, because they were our technical specialists at the time, and working out what can be done and not. And like Simon says, there was a whole thing about WebAR app and stuff like that. We had no time for an app or anything like that. The blocker of asking someone to download something, the additional comms that would have to be created to drive people to download the app, and then all the approvals and stuff. So WebAR basically became that thing that it was like, if we want to do this idea, how can we do that idea, and what is possible within WebAR?
Okay, and you mentioned in the brief that Burger King was trying to both encourage folks to go to store, but also have an experience that entertained them and could be available, outside of the store itself. So how does AR solve for that for you? Why was AR the right choice?
It's just fun. I mean, I think that since whilst this goes all the way back to sort of iPhone 7s and later, the modern phones are getting better and better and better, which means that what used to be only possible within an app is actually now possible straight in browser. And Simon's already talked about the benefits of being pure in browser. But with the likes of, iPhone 10s and later, Galaxy S10s, and later, there's a lot that you can do, which means that you can create quite a lot of stuff at a relatively low file size. And if you've got access to a talent like Tinie, you can just make something that's just really entertaining. So the driver into store was the fact that the QR code, which has suddenly come back to life after the last year, after sort of everyone hating it for about a decade, those were stickers that were stuck on the burgers. So people had to physically go in store, not just in the UK, but globally, where we were doing this activation. And so the only way they could experience it was by going into a store. So that was doing the traffic driving and getting people into store. But then after that, we then opened it up, shared it on social media, and the likes, and through Tinie's own social channels, which then meant that anybody could go and do it, even whether the activation was happening in their country, or even if they were at a place where, because there's a lot of people who are still not able to or not comfortable leaving home. So it means it's available for everyone.
Was Rapper on a Rapper the original title?
No, I think it was always Whopper on a Whopper because the song is Whopper.
Right.
And also, like me, I can't say rapper on a rapper because it must. Yeah.
I was actually using Rapper on a Rapper as my like vocal exercises to warm up for today's webinar, so I agree with that. Well, let's go into the experience itself. So, Carlson, I know we saw a little bit in the video, but just to set the tone, can you describe the WebAR experience?
Sure. It's actually really relatively simple, and like Rich was saying, it basically wrote itself. Whopper on a Whopper. I can't even say it. But I think that's also part of the power. It's a simple, relatively straightforward piece that gets you into the experience pretty quickly. So, as Rich mentioned, Whoppers were in the store, delivered with a QR code on them. There's a call to action on the QR code that takes you to, well, part of it too is it's just a really nicely designed sticker. There's intrigue to it. You get a sense of what's going on, but you still want to go ahead and scan it. Once you do scan it, what comes up is a loading bar, and I think that part of, once you get through a couple permissions, but I think the loading bar actually is an important part of the experience. It's also well designed. It has an entertainment feel to it as well, and watching the logo itself kind of fill up with color. There's already an engagement there, and that was needed, I think, because it takes a little bit to load the content. But once you do, you have a graphic that allows you to place it basically anywhere on the table. Ideally, it's over a Whopper itself. But as you'll see, and if you notice in the video, it's actually Tinie, and he's on a CG Whopper. There's a little bit of a transition, but then Tinie goes in and does this thing and sings. I think there's a kind of an interesting note here too. I mean, maybe it's more from a development standpoint. Is originally we were going back and forth and trying to track the QR code and put Tinie actually on the Whopper itself, but because of the size and there were just way too many variables and like how the sticker might be placed on it, from different angles and things like that. The decision was to just make it a CG Whopper, and so we've got Tinie on a CG Whopper. Nice thing about that is that you can place it anywhere, you can scale it, and then listen to the song, and it's a catchy tune. It's about 30 seconds if I'm remembering correctly, and I think that's actually another big factor about this. There's just enough there to really get into it and to appreciate the wow factor, but it leaves you wanting more, and I think that's an important part.
Carlson, I really love some of the details that you're like stressing, especially around like the sticker and the time that's spent on like the call to action, making that in itself, appealing, clear, enticing. So I think like that's definitely something I'd love the audience to take away is, we're going to be talking a lot about the technology and the experience, but it all starts with the user looking at the burger and saying, I want to scan this. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah,
Rich, I think you were jumping in.
There's a big thing from our point of view, from a creative point of view, is like, these day and ages, everyone's got such a limited attention span. It's like, it's the why on earth would I want to press that button, click on that, engage with that when there's so much other stuff I just want to flick past in my Instagram feed or whatever and just look through it all. And you're just like, oh, I'm going to stop on that. So what's going to stop them and go, oh, I'm intrigued. So whether that's in the design, whether that's in promotional activity or anything like that, the whole 30-second bit, I think there was a big part of originally the whole idea was the whole song, but the file size would have been quite prohibitive on that. Also from a actual capture and then rendering time, because, and Simon may go into this, but like there's a lot of information going on there that you have to then clean up, render, and then get those files over to the dev team. And if I talk a little bit about time, this is definitely an 8 to 10 week project that we did in 3.5 weeks, from shoot to it being live 3.5 weeks, which I don't recommend to anyone on this call. And we'll never tell your clients that you've ever done that. But we were limited because Tinie was doing very specific promotional activity on certain days. And it was a case of, if we can't make this time frame, this campaign doesn't happen. And the brilliant thing was everyone was just like, okay, let's just see what we can do. And when Carlson talks about the putting Tinie on a Whopper, that actually became a better idea than trying to place him on the QR code, because if you then wanted to share it via social media, you don't have the sticker. Also, the fidelity of the burger, if people get to play with it, is fantastic, and that didn't change until about a day or two before go live, where they really drove the quality of that, which meant changing how the volumetric capture data was all in there, and there was a lot of going back and forth from a technical point of view of just maintaining that quality whilst, you know, keeping the file size down. Yeah,
there's a balancing act between getting, you know, Tinie looking good as a volumetric video, but ensuring that the burger looked good as well, and making sure that everyone was happy with both.
And Simon, let's take some time to dig into volumetric video, the scanning process, what it's like working with talent within the studio. Let's first start by just making sure the audience understands what we mean when we say volumetric video. Let's start there.
Yeah, so volumetric video is essentially 3D video. My virtual background on the call today is the stage in which we filmed Tinie, and it's an array of 106 cameras placed around the talent, and basically it captures a performance. So it's a linear performance capture technology, which, you know, there's a volume in the center, and whatever performs in that sphere is captured by the cameras. It's based on a Microsoft mixed reality capture system. And whilst you can vary the number of cameras, you know, we can work with 106, you know, captures more data. We can also scale that back, you know, to work with 64 cam setups, for example, depending on the requirements. But ultimately what you get is a one-to-one verbatim representation of a performance as it plays out. So it's a video recording, but in 3D. And then we provide that as a 3D asset, which can be ingested into, you know, a VR experience or an AR experience, as in the WebAR campaign with Tinie.
And I know that often these are referred to as holograms. Are these holograms? Where do you sit with that term?
Yeah, good shout. I think it gets, holograms gets used. Volumetric video within the industry gets used quite a lot. I think, you know, for brands, production companies, consumers, even quite often holograms is used, or even avatars. I think anything goes in that regard. I mean, strictly speaking, holograms is normally slightly translucent. With what we do here, yes, we can make the characters look translucent, but actually you capture, you know, a solid mesh, and you know, it looks authentic. So you capture all those details that make you, including, you know, what goes into a performance. So all of the imperfections, the good and the bad, all comes through in what's filmed.
I think one thing, just to finish on that, I think the main difference that we always saw, and what was possibly sold in earlier as an idea, but was immediately like thrown down by the creators, was like, you can just shoot flat video on green screen, cut them out with a key and stick them on a flat panel. And then wherever you go, you will always see them. And you see a lot of that stuff in AR at the moment. The beauty of the volumetric is, and that's why there's sort of, you want to go in and try it again and again, is you can spin him around, you can move the camera around and just see what he's doing from behind. And like, there's a bit in there where he's sort of pointing like this, saying Whopper, Whopper. And what you realize is there's actually Whopper in studs written on the back of his jacket, which you can zoom right in and see all that detail. And that's the lovely thing where, you know, it's proper, like it's a miniature person right in front of you, rather than just like a little flat transparent screen.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Richard. You can definitely explore the content in more ways with volumetric.
And it feels more real too. It feels like Tinie's actually there on a burger in your space when you're able to see him in 3D. I know I had the pleasure of being scanned, and it was the very first time I got to see the back of my head, and I'll never forget it. That's all I'll say. So, but Simon, talk a little bit about the experience in working with talent in a studio, a volumetric video studio, specifically to Tinie too, some of the details perhaps there.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I mean, like Richard mentioned earlier, I mean, this was the brief we were never expecting to get, let's place a rapper on a rapper. But it was a huge amount of fun, and working with Tinie, he was great. For us, it was a fairly straightforward production. I think, Tinie was with us for an afternoon. So an afternoon back in July last year, he was pre-briefed before he came into the studio. We've got a process which we run through to make talent comfortable with what's happening, if you like. And it was in our London stage, which is the picture behind me. It was a 30-second capture, final content. We can film, more than that. And what we tend to do is we film a number of options, and then we make selects and make a backup before that content's then processed. The capture itself, I think it took the final processed content took between 7 and 8 days to hand over. We normally provide an early first pass about 2 days in. And yeah, in terms of things that we test for, so we look at things like wardrobe, hair, certain garments, certain reflective surfaces sometimes can, play with the cameras a bit. So we like to test everything in advance. So when the talent comes into the studio, they've had a briefing, we've done the tests on what we're filming, and we try and make the talent as comfortable as possible as soon as they come into the stage and get them performing in the space. It's quite an intimate stage. So you're generally speaking, the talent's in there on their own, or they might have a director stood to one side. Otherwise, they're performing as they normally would.
And when you're prepping the talent for volumetric video, are there specific things that are, I guess, unique to volumetric capture to ensure that the capture quality is what you're expecting, like wardrobe, things like that?
There are definitely some watch outs. What a performer might do with their hands, wardrobe, like I mentioned, reflective surfaces can sometimes be an issue. We've actually, advancements being made in volumetric all the time, and we've actually, solved some of the challenges we would have had with Tino if he was wearing a metallic suit, for example, last year. Some of that's already been solved, which is why we like to test things ahead. Sometimes black can throw up a problem, but you could have the same pair of black jeans. One would resolve really well, and the other one might have some issues, and it could just be the detergent that they've been washed in. So that there's wardrobe guidelines, there's test guidelines. We have to be careful with hair, and yeah, like I say, that a lot of that is dealt with in advance, so that when the talent comes into the studio on the day, the preparation's been done. Our team are very adept at working with high-profile talent. I mean, the stage that I'm virtually in at the moment, we've had Madonna, Michael Bublé, a whole bunch of people through this stage, as well as Tinie.
Well, it's another reason not to wash your jeans. It's like volumetric video captures, the takeaway. So Carlson, let's get a little bit into like the development and the design of the WebAR experience. What were some of the insights and lessons learned in creating that part of the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big ones, Rich touched on, is to not try to do something like this in 3.5 weeks. We made it, but it was a sprint across all teams. But I think there's several. I mean, and one of the things that really made that possible, though, I think, and I this is a bit of a plug for 8Talks, is the platform, is the 8Talks platform, and in particular the starter projects, because what those allow for is you can clone them and pretty immediately just get into a lot of functionality that would take a lot of time to build out. Obviously, you need to customize it, and you can get in and really get behind the scenes and tweak it specifically for the project that you've got. For instance, part of one of the aspects that we needed to do was, make sure that the content was always facing the camera when it spawned, right? minor thing, but it helps with the experience. It's a nice subtlety. And I'll talk about some of the integration with the volumetric video. There was a mention about really, Simon was mentioning about really having to optimize that, but I can get into that later. But those are, there's coming back to the platform. I think that really helped us get in there quickly, and then build to a point that we could deliver so quickly.
And you mentioned already the loading bar, which I think it was shown in the video. In its own right, it was delightful. As the animation lit up while people were waiting for the experience to load. But do you have other examples of things like some design details or just like any guidance that especially those that are listening could really take away and say, oh, I wouldn't have thought to spend so much time doing that, but actually it really makes all the difference in the world for the end user experience.
Yeah, well, one of the challenges that we did run into is the whole social sharing aspect of it. Had a nice border around it, that's from a design standpoint, but then the actual functionality, it was a little ahead of, I think, where the social sharing is right now. And so had to spend a lot of time figuring that out specifically for iOS. Android was kind of a walk in the park, but iOS and making sure that there was a clear path to sharing was definitely one of the challenges.
I can add to that, Carlson. I think that, as you say, Android, absolutely fantastic. iOS, complete pain in the backside, because basically for the devs out there, Android will capture an image as a screen share and then go, it's got image data, it knows exactly what it's doing. You do that on an iPhone and it's just you try and paste that into a Facebook post or WhatsApp or something like that, and it's just a long string of characters. That was a problem. And that was one of the things that was, sharing was a massive part of this to breed word of mouth and stuff. And that's what was sold in. And there was, because we were doing this so fast and because a lot of this was quite new, I think that was quite a significant challenge, to the point where we might have taken the image, hosted it on an AWS server, and then pasted a link to that AWS server to go back in. So the end result for the end user is exactly the same, but there's a huge amount of back and forth. And in Europe, we've got GDPR, which means all of a sudden we need to think about where that image is going, how the data is being used. And in the end, we were able to just get rid of that and find ways around it. But that was a real challenge. From a design point of view, I think because this was an English language, but going global, iconography is really important. I hate clutter. So the designers really thought about, there are so many icons about what is the share button, the download button, the take a photo button. These things may seem really simple, but good UX and UI is really important. A simple hamburger menu that everyone kind of gets, that if you do that, you can get lots of other things, because we also directed people to their nearest Burger King to download the Burger King app and to download Tinie song. So keeping all that stuff out of the experience, so it's not really heavy, was really important, especially because some people's phones are not like iPhone 8 Maxes, which are ridiculously large.
And the next question I wanted to get into, Carlson, you kind of teed it up, was around like what you need to think about when integrating volumetric video and WebAR. But I'm seeing also some questions from the audience around the work that needed to be done in order to convert, the dimension volumetric video to work in WebAR. What was the final size after compression of the 30-second clip, and was there any impact to the detail? So let's take some time now, I think, to talk through that. Maybe Simon and Carlson, you can kind of talk through like what the audience needs to know about getting volumetric video ready for WebAR and integrating that in the experience.
Sure, I'll start and Simon jump in here, please. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is file size, right? It needs to be something that will actually work on in the browser and be able to download relatively quickly. I believe 8Wall, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong on this, still has like about 100 megabyte limit for file size. So we were kind of limited in that regard, and I think it worked out well because it shortened the overall experience, which was nice. But finding a file size that really balanced loading quickly and the high fidelity of the performance that we were really after, it took a lot of back and forth with the Dimension team, tweaking the assets, kind of going back and forth on finding that. I think the final file size was, I believe, about 170 meg, but we broke that down into 15 or 17 individual pieces. Had to make sure that they played together seamlessly, but that allowed us to download smaller packets, get into the performance a little quicker, and also coming back to the loading bar, it allowed us to drive the loading bar animation. Simon, anything on the files themselves? Maybe you can talk to that.
I think you've covered it pretty well, Carlson. I mean, I think we provided you with, what was it, an MP4 file? You know better than me on this one, but yeah, we have to be careful when it comes to managing file size and data. I think the stage when it's filming throws off something like 10 gigabytes of data a second, and we've worked hard to provide optimization pipelines depending on the channels that the technology's been used in to ensure we can get best results and playback which doesn't break good customer experiences, and they've been improved all the time to a point now where it wasn't long ago that getting volumetric video to play in WebAR was a challenge. Well, now we're there, and I know 8Talks and Microsoft, for example, have been working closely on enabling that to happen, and we previously run tests with the 8Talks team on another project. So the Tinie project was another step forward, and I think we'll continue to see the space evolve and the content become easier and easier to work with. We're working on different editing tools as well to advance what you can do with volumetric video, ways in which you can up-res certain parts of the body or the face, ways in which you can relight. So it's becoming much more creatively flexible and easier to deploy across lots of platforms.
And I love what you're talking.
Oh, sorry, Tom, I was going to say, happy to share specs if offline or afterwards if somebody's really interested. We can get them over to you.
And what I was going to just stress is, like, I love that both of you are talking about thinking about the optimal user experience, knowing that this is in the browser, right? And so it's less like 100 megabyte technical limit. I mean, we could certainly push past that, but more about like what does the end user, how long would the end user want to wait for the file, for example, to load? What phone are they using, and how much of the battery life do they have? Like, there's a lot of things to think about from a user perspective. So as you mentioned, Carlson, it's more about figuring out the solution that you're looking to have within web-based augmented reality, understanding that this is browser-based technology that is running across various devices, and figuring out solutions that allow for you to be able to create the necessary potential loading sequences, for example, or optimizations on the file to still allow for you to deliver that wow factor that you all set out to do. So I think that's a really important thing.
I've seen one of the questions was about file size. So I think the final package of absolutely everything, the whole experience, was 67 meg, and the optimal experience was always going to be on Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is fairly ubiquitous, but we had to make it, it worked on 3G. I mean, it took a while to download, but even so, 4G, you were looking at anywhere between 15 and 50 seconds, depending on how strong your connection was. The optimal will always be, and that was once you were in and actually at the loading. You weren't sitting around waiting for that loading bar to pop up. So the optimal thing is you need to get people engaged within 20 to 30 seconds realistically. Otherwise, you'll probably lose them. Yep. Mm-hmm. They're fickle like that.
This dovetails right into the next question, which is all about how this WebAR experience fit into the overall marketing campaign. And I'd love to, talk a lot about like messaging, and like you already mentioned, like the burger itself had a QR code. Where else was this being distributed? Where else could end users discover it? How did you make sure they understand what this was all about? Let's take some time to talk about that.
Sure. So there was a lot of activations going back and forth with Tinie. So there was a little bit of, as you saw in the film, Tinie announcing the song and us engaging with him. There was also, as is often the case when you actually look under the hood, is there was a lot of behind the scenes and then scripted dialogue between the two parties. It was a UK based account, and yet once we'd moved beyond the original 2 weeks of in store in certain branches, it was going out across Burger King social channels and Tinie social channels, so globally, and so each of the local markets that were engaged, and I think there was 15 markets, I think, but it was, we were looking at the analytics, and we had, apart from Antarctica, every continent covered, number of places that there was no activation, and yet people were definitely seeing it and then activating it. So people in central Siberia were playing with it, and in Puerto Rico and all sorts of different places, which was great to see and quite fun to watch the map. We were also doing there was quite a significant TikTok activation, and there was also a free Whopper for a year card, like a black card for people, and so that didn't exist. Burger King had never done that before, and so that was a whole Tinie branded activation and thing, and some of that was about what people captured on the experience, but also just general engagement with the brand as part of the wider campaign.
That's great. I love that black card idea. I meant to ask when we were talking about the experience itself. It was very interesting, and I love with AR that you're able to play with scale, and sometimes just playing with scale makes something feel very, magical. Like you're not really able to, see a very tiny wrapper on a burger. So like was scale like an immediate go-to right from the original
I think
idea?
The important thing was when it appeared, it was preferably life size. Yes, there's a lot of AR activations you open and suddenly something's absolutely massive and you've got to go in scale, but there was enough that I think, Carlson, we put some percentages in, like you could make it 300% bigger, but you could go down to like pretty tiny, but then we stopped it so that there was a bit of control involved. But the idea is, as soon as you open the activation, the burger, it's as if it's sitting right in front of you.
How was the burger created?
That was done by the Dimension team. So we were looking at lots of different ways of doing that. One was, I think the Dimension team actually bought a whole load of Whoppers and ate them, scanned them and then ate them.
We got a year's supply of Whoppers. I think it was scanned in the end. I think we scanned the Whopper after we
supplied a whole load of artwork, but the problem with the artwork is it's a flat so the artwork that's actually printed onto the brown paper and then you wrap. But what that doesn't do is you then actually, the better thing of the scan was that actually you saw all the folds and it looked a much more naturally wrapped, realistic. But as I said earlier, the original renders were coming out really pretty blurry, and the client, the one big thing that was, they're the ones paying for this, and the one thing that was saying Burger King was really poorly legible and stuff like that. And so the team at Dimension worked really hard to bring down the quality elements of Tinie, which is still ridiculously high fidelity, and the final burger is absolutely fantastic. That was a lot of work that the Dimension team put in to make that.
I just want to remind the audience that you can ask questions in the Q&A. I see some people raising their hands or using their chat. Please funnel your questions into the Q&A. I'm going to start to turn our session over to questions that you have for the group. Richard, you mentioned the client. So just in terms of like the experience, how was this experience measured, and any kind of feedback, I guess, from the client in the reaction to the experience when it went live?
This is one of the clients that you always want. That they are genuinely, and I don't say this because there are lots of other clients that are somewhat more challenging. They're brilliant, and actually the biggest challenge for us was my creative directors who are constantly trying to push the boat. But as a wider campaign performance, we were looking at social engagement. At its most basic at the beginning, it was like, are we driving people into stores? There was a big worry about, are people going to start going back to Burger King and start going back in store? And then we're looking at the activation numbers, and then also the wider campaign piece that we were talking about before with TikTok and the black card. The black card, actually, that was Tinie's idea. He went, I want to be able to give someone free Whoppers. And so that didn't exist. And we were trying to have to negotiate 8 for quite a while to get Burger King to do that. And they made it happen, which was, again, a client that was really willing to work well with us. It was great.
That's great. If you I'm going to ask this question to you all, but if you could go back and tell your early self one piece of advice around this campaign, and just like the overall project itself, like what would you share?
Give yourself some more time. Try and get some sleep in the beginning. Spend more time on QA, because the Bully team were amazing, but we were all working, like 18-hour days through the weekend, and I would have, as a producer, always want to have time to properly test. And we were very fortunate that the product that went out, and then when anything that were like, oh, we haven't tested on this device and we need to tweak something, the Bully team got straight in. And that's the other great thing about WebAR is you can just make that update, and when the next person goes in or refreshes the browser, it's just there and it's up. If you had to resupply an app, you go through all manner of different problems. So yeah.
Carlson?
I think time would be a big one. I think otherwise I think part of the theme here is that it really fell into place. Kind of stars aligned for the most part on it. We could really ask some of the developers. I think they'd probably have a different answer than I, but it felt like it lined up everything from the creative, just all the way down the chain. So
one of the questions from the audience is for Carlson is, what other software outside of 8Ball was used to create the experience, whether it be like assets or otherwise?
Yeah, so certainly the Adobe suite, but I'm gonna have to circle back on that. I don't know all of the specifics on the software. If they're asking about scanning, like for the Whopper, that might be something that Simon can answer. I'm throwing it over to you again.
So the Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture system is what we use for the volumetric video. Yeah.
What was the scan? What was the object scan? Not you didn't use Microsoft.
Oh, the object scan. Oh God, now you've got me.
All right, sorry. Yeah.
Don't know. I'd have to come back on that one. Sorry.
Actually, Simon, there's a question from the audience around the burger and Tinie. Was that exported as one volumetric video, or are they two separate objects, or?
They were filmed independently. How were they provided to you, Carlson? Were they provided as one file? We're bouncing this one back and forward.
No, I think that they were combined. I think that the ultimately that became part of that sequence that was split up. I'm gonna have to. We'll circle back.
I do remember seeing one thing, which was
it feels like it years ago. Right?
Seeing a volumetric capture that is then cut out and flattened out onto a square. So like bottom third was the burger wrapper for that one frame, and then there were just little bits as if you'd literally taken Tinie, flattened him, and then cut out all the little bits and pieces, and so it was just a flat JPEG that had everything in it.
Texture atlas. Yeah. If you would like to take the globe and you were to view it flat, similar principle.
Let's talk a little bit about just like AR and WebAR as well. And I'd love to understand, the types of questions that you are answering around augmented reality with customers and clients. Like what are the topics that they're looking to discuss? What questions do they have about this technology? Just in general, not maybe even specific to this campaign, although it could be. Anybody have some insights there?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's a really exciting time for content creators and storytellers, because if you think about the possibilities with augmented reality, spatial content, the metaverse that's coming, it really changes the game in terms of how you can create and develop experiences for consumers to act, and engage with in new ways. the idea that AR provides like portals into new worlds, or that we can have 3D content and a 3D web living in the physical world around us, right? It opens up crazy possibilities. So a lot of the inquiries we get really around, what's next. We've seen, Tinie on Burger King, or we've seen, an H&M campaign where you've got this beautiful AR pop-up storybook, and then you've got the fashion collection and the modeled in front of you as these vignettes, and customers are like, this is so cool, what's coming. And because of the pace of change at the moment and the evolution with various technologies, you've got not just volumetric video, you've got real-time game engines, you've got the AR cloud, you've all these technologies coming together which are fundamentally changing the way in which content can be created, and that's really exciting. So the questions we get asked are around what's next, how do I explore and experiment more with the technologies, knowing that I think we all read similar press these days, right? What's coming down the line in terms of some of the products which will be released, whether it's rumors about what Apple are up to, or whether it's next generation virtual reality headsets. Ultimately, the content is very similar. It's it's three-dimensional with volumetric content that you can move through in space and time. And I think that presents a really rich layer for brands to start telling their stories in new ways with.
I think
Simon,
that sorry, I was going to say, like, things like the latest iPhone 12, which has a LiDAR sensor built in, allows for some pretty brilliant test footage that I've seen, where things are just, people are just holding out their hands and things are sitting on them automatically, and you're not having to code that in. It's just like it's recognizing an object recognition. I think that I've just done a VR project. I don't necessarily think the future's in VR. I think it's definitely a sort of mixed reality. I think it's going to be glasses in some form or another, and it doesn't have to just be entertainment. All of this stuff that we've been talking about is all entertaining. I think about the practical use of how will you engage with the wider world, and wanting to have that sort of always on, but see what's going on, and you can just see it in the corner of your eye. I think 5G is going to bring a massive step up, because all these little challenges about, oh, it's 60 meg or it's 80 meg, it's like none of that will matter anymore. Yeah. You'll just have a pipe, and you'll just have, and that means that if you've got a 5G enabled device, all the processing can be done remotely on a server somewhere, a bit like the sort of the Google Strava system. So you don't have to have be carrying, lugging behind you a massive computer system that has a battery life of 7 minutes. So I think that the pace that technology is going, the speed with which broadband connections are just going to open up, which means you can do more and you can have higher fidelity objects. We were thinking about, one of the original ideas, we'd have Tinie and some dancers, and that would have massively impacted the amount of data that we were able to capture and the space and everything else. But with 5G, you actually might be able to have, significantly more opportunities to do interesting things.
That's absolutely coming, and we're going one step further, I think, because we'll start to see the introduction of low latency, near real-time experiences. Obviously, with Tinie, he was pre-recorded. Well, we're moving towards a position where actually you'll start to see volumetric performances, holoportation, holograms that are driven in real time, so you can capture a performance in one location, you can stream it to another for audiences to experience, in near real time.
Yeah, and product launches right in your home.
That's coming. Yeah.
Simon, a question that we have from the audience that I'd like to ask is around volumetric video versus T-pose motion capture. So the question is, like, instead of capturing Tinie as a volumetric video, why not capture static T-pose and then just use motion capture and bringing for the avatar? I don't know if anybody wants to.
Yeah, we quite often get asked that. I mean, the fundamental difference between a volumetric video and an avatar, if you like, that uses a traditional, games pipeline, is volumetric video is, it's linear performance capture. So everything that's performed within the camera system is captured. So it's authenticity, everything from the look of the person, the realism, the photorealism, to the way in which the fabrics on their clothes move, is all 100% authentic, right? So it's accurate. You could absolutely go down an avatar pipeline, but you'd be creating an avatar that will look, depending on how you style it, it could be abstract, or it could be something which is approaching, metahumans, for example, but it won't look photoreal right now. The advantage, of course, with that approach is that you can drive that with different types of animation data. You can puppeteer it in real time. You can work with the avatar after the fact. So with volumetric video, there's a certain amount you can do in the editing, but you can't completely repose and then drive that performer that you filmed in a volumetric video stage with a whole new set of animation data at the moment. So there's differences and nuances between the way in which you might use an avatar versus volumetric video. They both have their their benefits.
Okay. Well, listen, we're almost at time, so I want to be cognizant of where we're at, because as I said at the top, I'm sure everyone's really hungry after saying Whopper, as many times as we did during this 1 hour. But I'd love just to leave the audience with just advice. So what advice would you give marketers who are looking to use web-based augmented reality? Carlson.
Yeah, from make it purposeful, right? I think where you can have a concrete reason for using WebAR. Yes, there's a wow factor to it. Yes, it's attention getting, but if it feels like a gimmick, if the audience feels like it's just a gimmick and there's no there's no rationale for it, it doesn't lead to anything more, it might not be the right solution. There might be something else. So it's I think it's important to really be thinking through that experience.
Simon?
I think Carlson absolutely nailed it. I mean, I would have said value. What's the value to the user, which is exactly what Carlson's describing. Whether it's entertainment value or utility value. You're getting the user experience right, which has been I suppose a common theme from our discussion today. But definitely, don't do it for the sake of it. You've got to think what value is this adding to the customer experience, and there's lots of ways to do that. Right now, the creative possibilities are really radical. So it's a pretty exciting time to be involved in AR.
Richard, final word.
I mean, the guys have said some brilliant stuff. I mean, yeah, don't throw tech at a problem. The tech should support the idea. So make sure that the idea is at the crux of it, whatever that happens to be, whether it's a film, whether it's a print ad, whether it's an activation like this. I think get a good partner involved and actually talk. I learned a ridiculous amount about the filming side of things and then about the dev side of things. And I was a dev for a long time before I moved into production, and I learned loads on this. And so you might just find things that and just go, well, we could do this, and they'll actually help develop that idea better. So yeah, work with the partners around you to help develop the idea into whatever it needs to be the best thing that it can be.
Amazing. Richard, Simon, Carlson, thanks so much for being here today. We have recorded the session and we'll make it available on the 8Ball YouTube channel. So all registrants will get a copy. And I thank you, the audience, for being here as well. Thanks for being part of 8Talks, and subscribe to the 8Ball newsletter or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn to see when the next 8Talks is ready to be live. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Dan.
Great day.